Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has been brought to you by the magic of a Ouija board, or several in fact, that some people have used. So get ready to embark on an interesting experience. Grab some salt, a few candles, and let the darkness take control. I have a story to tell that my mum told me a while back. It was her experience with a Ouija board, and my mum wouldn't make something like this up. The whole reason she even told me about it was because I brought up the idea of using one to contact a younger brother who passed away. Anyway, her story freaked me out enough to never use one. Back when she was in high school late one night, her and a group of her friends were cruising around on gravel roads a few miles outside of town, as I live in a small town in Iowa, and they stopped at an old abandoned barn and decided to whip out an old Ouija board one of her friends had. My mum had a really bad feeling right off the bat and said she wasn't going to do it. While everyone kept calling her a sissy and saying it wouldn't work unless everyone was there. So my mum was convinced, but only on one condition. She'd play if they didn't ask sketchy questions. Some of the guys laughed and promised not to. So they all gathered around the floor of the barn and placed their hands on the slider of the board. They asked some basic questions about it. Is there anyone here? What's your name? Things like that. But there was no response. Then a guy called Terry asked, which one of us will be the first to die? And my mum pulled her hands off the board and said, that's not funny. She was super pissed and everyone screamed at her to put her hand back on the board. As soon as she put her hand back on, the piece moved and spelled out the initials of a boy who was there. CJ. He was a twin. His twin was also present, and after that they said their goodbyes because they were all freaked out and my mum was pissed, and everyone was blaming each other for moving the piece on the board. So anyway, they all went home and basically forgot about the whole thing. Years later, that CJ was out driving on a gravel road and he ended up crashing into the ditch and lost his life. The first one out of everyone there. And the creepy thing is that when the police were done investigating the crash, they said the tire flew off because someone purposely loosened the lug nuts on the tire. So, ever since she told me that story, I've been too scared of trying the board. I had a teacher who had a very interesting Ouija board story. This teacher joked around and wasn't really ever serious, but was funny as hell and an overall good teacher. But when Ouija boards came up, she got extremely serious and shared a bone-chilling story. She had some friends over one weekend and they got bored and decided to break out the good old household Ouija board. They had asked questions and got weird vibes from some of the answers that they received, but pushed forward. Finally, someone asked when they were going to die, and it went around the circle and everyone got a decent number in their 80s or 70s. But one girl got the age 19. Granted, they were juniors/seniors in high school, so that was only a few years away. A few years go by, and the girl who got 19 as the age of death was killed by a car while walking on a beach, while on spring break. Her friend she was with broke her leg or something. She was 19, just a week away from turning 20. The nature of the death and the fact that she was close to her 20th birthday makes it so scary because she was so close to defying the Ouija board. Never ever doing it. Needless to say, I'm too terrified to get answers like that. I've gone back and forth with the idea of sharing this for a while. After searching through a lot of places on the internet, this seems like the best place to discuss them. I still have my reservations though. In any case, I am looking for answers. Several years ago I was doing my undergraduate studies at a large university in Pennsylvania. This event happened in 2005. I was dating a girl called Erin at the time who was big into New Age ideas, paganism, magic, and the like, and I did learn some cool stuff from her too. Eventually I met some of her like-minded friends, and in our conversations it came up that one of the rooms in the oldest building on campus caused two of them, a guy and a girl who were dating, to experience a lot of psychic distress. Kyle had gotten nosebleeds in the classroom, and Julie often grew disoriented or frightened when she was there. Someone in our group had the bright idea to sneak up there one night, and of course we all went for it. It was me, Kyle, Julie, Erin, and a medium named Audra and her friend Sharon, and another girl called Kesha. Sharon and Kesha, like me, had a lot of supernatural experiences in the past, but didn't consider themselves mediums or sensitive or anything. So one night we bought a novelty Ouija board from Walmart, a glow-in-the-dark one because why not, and started doing our thing. At first the planchette didn't do anything, but then it started twitching and eventually it was whipping around choosing letters that made no sense to any of us. Until afterwards, as Kyle was writing down the letters. Then out of nowhere, Audra started mini convulsions. I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes rolled up and she started spasming and making these horrific pig noises. Not just snorting or squealing, but belting those noises out like I never thought a human would be able to make. She started crawling her way to the door. The planchette was going crazy, and when Kyle jumped to her to keep her from heading towards the stairs which were directly across the hall, we all kind of snapped out of it. Audra was a small, slim girl, but it took 3 or 4 of us to keep her from leaving the room, and all the while there were still horrible noises coming from her, and we all had this incredible sense of danger and foreboding. There wasn't a terrible smell or anything like you read sometimes, but it was terrifying. Not to be anticlimactic, but after that we packed everything up, went back to my apartment over a crappy pizza shop, and stayed huddled together for quite a while. I swear I threw the Ouija board out, but years later I would find it under my bed at a parent's house when I was packing up to move. Seriously, any thoughts or experiences similar or general comments would be great. This was last summer, about a year ago. I was in rehab and decided to make a Ouija board, and me and my 3 roommates all agreed we would try it out. We were all very skeptical, mostly leaning towards the side of disbelief, but still open. It was a full moon that night. We started by all holding hands in a circle around the board and saying that we were open to spirits, willing to talk, and I guess just putting the energy out there. We then took the planchette and moved it around the board in circles a few times. We were in rehab with no access to the internet, so kind of just doing what we felt was right, and weren't sure on proper procedures. When we were all moving our hands, we were heavy on the board, and you could feel it being dragged. I will admit I tried moving it on my own, as well as in the beginning just to mess with my friends, but again the planchette felt like it was being dragged. But then I stopped and began to take it seriously, and when it was actually moving. It's hard to explain, but there was an entirely different energy to it. It glides across the board like butter. The board and planchette, of course, were made of cardboard, so it freaked us all out. Sometimes a couple of us would take our hands off, or we'd tell another girl to move her hand and it would keep going. It spells one of the girls' names, Sally. We asked who's contacting her, and it said, sister. Sally had a little sister that died under her care when they were small. Sally was scared. She asked for its name and it spelled F-L-O-R. I'm thinking maybe it's trying to say Florida but stopped, but at this point Sally is shaking and in tears. Her sister's name was Flor. None of us knew that. After that I think we contacted another spirit and said that it was female and had been shot, and maybe another one. It's crazy because the energies feel different, like how it glides across the board. So now we're all total believers. I think maybe the next night or 2 nights after, me and my roommate decide to play. I think we contacted a spirit similar to the last one when all of a sudden the vibe completely changes. It spells out my name. And I'm like, oh no, as my name is very unique. And even though I believe in this now, that's the last thing I wanted to happen, for something to address me directly. Then the planchette starts zooming back and forth between A and Z really fast over and over, basically flying out of our hands. We're kind of scared, and no matter what we ask, it keeps repeating the same letters over and over, and we get spooked and stop playing. The next night we decide to try again. Start like usual, putting forth our intentions, doing circles and asking how many spirits were there with us. My name was spelled out again, and I asked who it was, and it said Father. My friend asked me if my dad was dead, so I said no. We asked it what it wanted, and dude, it was spelling out painful, and then went back to doing the AZ thing. Deciding it wasn't going anywhere, we said goodbye and put it away. We tried one more night, but it was the same spirit messing with us with the same letters over and over. So, didn't do it again. The whole experience was so insane to me. I kept a journal of all of this when it happened. So, I went and looked, and tried to give all the details I could for you to understand the experience. I tried to contact a paranormal entity, and some not so fun things happened. So this is the time my friends and I decided to be extra dumb. And I say this because I want all of those listening to understand that I, as well as my friends, now fully understand how stupid we were being. The important backstory for this location, Proctor Valley. Proctor Valley is in San Diego County and connects the towns of Otay and Jamal. It is protected and is a wildlife area, so there are no houses, no buildings, no businesses. It's situated behind a prominent mountain with hilly ridges boxing in the valley. It is said that this valley is a center for the unexplained. Stories ranging from lights in the sky, ghost cars, ladies in white, random screams, the usual stories that surround almost every isolated dirt road. The place is surrounded with rumors. It is, however, in actuality, a dangerous place. Being situated near the US-Mexico border, it is a pathway frequented for drug smuggling, and being an isolated dirt road on the outskirts of a major city, things tend to go down there. You have your usual terrible stuff, like carjacking, people having their lives ended, as well as lots of bad other things. But a murder in particular stands out. The apparent poisoning of a teenage girl in a blue floral dress that was never identified, found barefoot on the side of the road. Now, time to share my experience. I had driven down the road late at night several times with friends for fun. The place has very few trees, let alone any large ones, but about midway down the road there is a very large tree hanging halfway over the road. This tree has always given me a bad feeling, so I never felt comfortable stopping there to explore. However, this night I was determined. So once and for all, I had to know if this place had something weird going on. I wanted my own experience, and I wanted it badly. I had dug up my family's old Ouija board and studied for weeks on the proper use of it, and how to get the results you want. The whole shebang. We purchased the correct candles, and found the most pure salt we could find, and we drove out to the road. This ended up being a bit of an event, as about 10 people showed up. 4 of us used the Ouija board, 2 filmed, and 4 sat in lawn chairs. Once we all got ready, we began. I, being dumb and unoriginal, thought we should go straight to Demon Land and try to anger a demon and contact it. Which demon? Pazuzu. Again, I was dumb and unoriginal. Well, after we initially started, we heard what sounded like orchestral music being played. Being on a road, we figured it was another car driving down in the distance, but would wait for it to pass and continue, because it would be a bit awkward if someone drove by and a bunch of people were summoning a demon. We waited 25 minutes, but no car showed up. There were no headlights, no noise besides the music, and us being a bit confused and somewhat scared, we carried on. The planchette was moving, but based on the answers, someone had to be moving it. So when a random twig snapped and everyone jumped out of fear, I just stayed with my finger on the planchette. One person, the person moving the planchette, got too scared and opted out. so I and 2 others braved on. I did my best to anger whatever could be out there, and to my surprise we got a response. There was no music being played anymore, and the piece was moving. I asked if anyone was there, and if they wished to communicate. The piece slowly moved to yes in a slow, smooth motion that honestly felt terrifying. It felt like it was being dragged across the board, not like someone was pushing or sliding it. With the confirmation of something wishing to speak, I moved to the next question. Are you Pazuzu? The same feeling. The planchette moved to no. My heart sunk. I was thinking, okay, well I got something biting, let's see what it is. I see everything is fixed on the board, eyes locked, and I asked probably the next logical thing that most people would. Are you a good spirit? Then the 2 phones that were being used to film the event turn off. They then wouldn't turn back on, and the planchette begins to move. It slides to the letter G, and we all let out a big phew. Everyone was relieved it was going to spell good, but then unsurprisingly, it moved to O, more confirmation, but then it stopped. Nothing. No movement at all for over 5 minutes. It was telling us to leave. I asked, do you want us to go? And as I finished the question, my friend drops to her knees. She was screaming and crying. I moved the planchette to goodbye, and I say it and rushed to her and asked her what happened. She said someone was walking over us and pointed down the road. I looked down, and all I saw was a cloud of dust roll off the road 15 feet away. This was the most honest person I'd ever known, and decided right then that we were leaving. She described the person walking towards us as having dark hair, long limbs, but no distinguished facial features. They walked like a video game character, glitching where they stride definitely didn't match pace at all, and their feet didn't seem to touch the ground. When she looked at it, she said she felt every emotion she'd ever felt come over her. She equated it to the feeling of your family dying while you win the lottery on your wedding day. This was almost 2 years ago, and my friend still refuses to go out at night. I tried a year ago, and she cried in the car the whole time, saying she's getting closer. And yes, she's been attending therapy for this. I don't know what she saw that night, but I personally don't want to find out. I have not returned to the road since. I stored away the board, but it went missing 6 days later to the day, along with the candles and books. When I was in my senior year of high school, one of my friends had a Ouija board that we would play with often. One night we decided to play the Ouija board at the cemetery because we wanted to see what would happen. We believed in the paranormal to some extent, but we were also skeptical. We just wanted to have a good time and hopefully get spooked. We specifically liked this cemetery because it was the easiest to sneak into. Its fence was a very low, short wall that you could hop over. There were recently dug places for new burials that were going to happen. We played a few times and spoke to some ghosts, nothing really scary or weird. We asked them if they were alone when they died, what their names were, etc. While playing, we started sensing this really awful smell, like rotten eggs and dead animal. We looked around and assumed it was coming from the holes that were freshly dug. We eventually left it because we got bored and the smell was gross. When we got in the car, we took off our shoes and started to sanitize our hands. That smell suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It was very strong. It smelled like death. We kept putting hand sanitizer on our hands, and when we would sniff them, it still smelled like it. After realizing the smell would not leave our hands, we all of a sudden got a chill and began screaming. We were all screaming inside my friend's car like girls from a horror movie. We finally calmed down and my friend turned on the engine and we bolted. We eventually started laughing because the whole ordeal was pretty funny, and we got what we wanted. But we'll never forget the smell. and how it wouldn't leave us be. Outside my town, there is an old abandoned orphanage and a memorial for all the children that were abused and passed away, and 5 of us decided it would be a great idea to go out there and explore it. We scoped the place out during the day to find ways to get in, and came back at night at around 11 to 11:30 p.m. We parked a few hundred meters down the road from it, out of sight just in case of police, and we began walking. We got close to the gate before one of my friends, who was the biggest skeptic adrenaline junkie alive, stops dead in his tracks, turns around, and starts sprinting, telling us that he saw someone in front of him. We all start running back towards the car. The entire time, there's rustling from the bushes like someone was following us. We get in the car and I turn around and see 2 to 3 figures clear as day standing behind the car, watching us drive off. 2 girls and a boy, between the ages of 13 and 16. So we decide to forget that and go to the witch's grave. In hindsight, an awful idea, but we were excited to go out and explore. I'm very into pendulum and actually had mine with me, and on the way up was communicating with a spirit that decided to follow us from the orphanage. Her name was Faith, and she was absolutely lovely. Around this time, I started getting a massive headache and my eyes were watering, but thought nothing of it. I started getting really tired and disassociated and fell asleep, or at least I thought I fell asleep. I woke up and it seemed like only 5 minutes had passed. We were just reaching the town with the grave, and one of the guys sitting beside me, Jay, was saying how I was staring out the window the entire time, going into a burst of laughter, and I sounded different and my laugh was different. We pull up to the witch's grave. Jay swears that we saw someone walk past it. We made a Ouija board and wanted to communicate with spirits. I didn't want to get out the car and neither did Jay. So we sat in the car listening to music while the rest of us sat in front of the grave messing with the board. Music started doing all funky and weird stuff. The radio was acting up, and prior everything was working perfectly. About 15 minutes pass, and Jay decides to get out to see how they're doing. He comes back in, followed by everyone else, seeming a little freaked out, and I asked what was wrong, and my other friend says that Jack was staring behind him. When he goes, "He's right behind you," he turned around and went back to the car. Jack had no memory of this, but the rest of the guys backed him up. The music stopped working, and we started driving back down the mountain. It got incredibly cold even with the heater on, so I started getting a massive headache behind my head and back of my ears, which is apparently a sign of spiritual attachment. Charlie is driving, Darren is in the passenger seat, and Michael was right, with Jay in the middle and I was on the left seat. Jay started tearing up a little bit and went silent before he started laughing. He turned to me very slowly with the biggest grin on his face and just stared. I asked him what he was doing, and he never replied. A few minutes later he was himself again. Charlie a few minutes later started spacing out really bad. We were using the pendulum, consulting and asking if there were any possible harm coming out this way, in which it violently answered yes, and we all yelled for Charlie to pull over. He was refusing, but eventually he did, and they swapped seats. I blacked out from there. From here I only remember what the guys filled me in on and what happened. So apparently, Charlie joked and said they should use the Ouija board and see what it wants. Upon that, my other friend replied in the most polite and formal tone that they should. Keep in mind that it's also the only thing he said the entire time, and I agreed with him, despite being very against wanting to use the board before. Apparently the 3 of them all decided it would be the best option to get some sage and burn it away, whatever it was that was attached. I'm the only person who owns sage, and upon hearing the mention of it, they said I burst out crying, apologizing and begging for them to not get it, saying that I didn't want to leave. Jay was freaking out, so him and Darren swapped seats. Darren's family is a line of white witches, so apparently he tried his best to bless both Charlie and myself, in which my responses to that were violently pushing him off me, thrashing about repeatedly and saying no, and very coldly and calmly saying, I don't like that. Darren is like one of my best friends, and I hold no ill will against him. So they do the sage. I let them in, and flat out refused to touch the sage and stood very far away from it. I got in the car and headed towards the riverbank. It was pliant but very slow to follow. They described him to be a zombie, my other friend. I was resisting, hesitating, crying and refusing to follow them, so they practically dragged me along. As soon as the sage was lit, they told me that I bolted and got as far away from it as possible and tried to jump over the edge of the river. They had to grab me and forcibly hold me and drag me in place. They said I was crying violently and that this would be over soon. I wake up. I was on the ground, still being held, with Darren raving the sage around me. Charlie checked on his phone and the first thing he said was, "It's only 1 a.m. 2 minutes ago." I felt confused and disoriented and tired. So of course, the best action for all of us was to go home and sleep it off. I stayed with my friends for the night, woke up the next day feeling like I just drank 2 bottles of vodka and went home. I still felt awful, so I went home, the headache behind my ears, and that still wasn't good. I felt cold despite having no fever, and it was a warm day, and I was wearing a hoodie. I was hearing knocking noises and footsteps outside my door. I had bad heart pain, I was throwing up, and my nose was bleeding badly. My friends messaged me saying that there was something wrong. Their mom was concerned about me, and they were coming to get me. So I went with them back to theirs. I explained to Jay's mum and dad what happened. Jay's dad, who doesn't really believe in this kind of stuff, but both of them had had paranormal experiences before, told me to go outside and stand on the grass, barefoot, and ground myself. That kind of worked. My other friend also turned around to stare at the gate because we both heard and saw something, and Jay's mum later confirmed that she saw it too. Ever since then, I see and hear things 100 times more than I used to, and I always carry obsidian with me. In my life, I have neither seen or felt anything I would classify as paranormal. Yet, I do believe it does exist, except what I decided to call the window episode and some Ouija tests. Here's my story. It must have been during high school. I was home just after being left alone by my father and brother, so I decided to make something to eat for myself when I heard it. Some rather strong knocks against my window. I assure you I was convinced my father or brother were back to get something that they must have forgotten, and just warned me of their presence. There had to be someone around the window. But there was nothing. No one. I checked all the windows in the house, but still nothing. So I just freezed for a few seconds, not understanding what happened. Was it bugs? Is it impossible for an insect to cause such a loud noise multiple times? Birds, perhaps? The wind? In any case, could it have been the neighbors? But then again, they live on the opposite side of where my brain has located the sound, and I have definitely recognized the noise that my windows could produce. I had thought about this during at least more than 1 year, searching for any explanation, but there was still none. But there are 2 elements drawing my attention in this episode. First, I heard the noise a bit after being left alone, as if the thing that caused the noise was heading towards me and just waiting for me to be alone. Then I recently noticed that the window episode coincides with the period where I made a Ouija with friends. It wasn't a very troubling experience. The glass was moving, forming more or less credible answers, that's all. But if the window noise is linked to my Ouija experience, I admit it's a bit more troubling. I have to talk about this with my friends. I have to talk about this with the friends I made the Ouija with. None of them gave me any other explanation, and I haven't told my family this. Not even sure if they take it seriously. Strange things have been happening in our flat. So for starters, I am a practicing pagan and have been my whole life. I am no stranger to the paranormal. I regularly sage our home or bless it while burning incense. We frequently have windows open, allowing a breeze through to whisk away any negative energy. I have a lot of experience with Ouija and seances. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not new to this kind of thing, but I'll be damned if they don't freak me out. I moved into the flat on the 14th of December 2018. When we came to view the flat, I immediately felt a positive energy. It was like I belonged there with my little one. The energy remained positive for the longest time, and little things happened. For example, I'd put my phone down in the living room, pop up to check on my daughter, come back and my phone would be nowhere. I would spend the next 10 to 15 minutes searching for it everywhere to no avail. Then I'd go back to where I had left it, and you guessed it, right there it would be. Now, of course, this could be put down to simple absent-mindedness on my part, but after it happened not only to me but also my fiancé and friends who regularly visit, I'm inclined to believe it's something a bit more. I own a Ouija board, just a cheap little thing. I store the board in the living room, currently on the bookshelf and the planchette in my kitchen with my other witchy bits. It would frequently fall off the bookshelf or the fireplace or the TV shelf, regardless of how it was placed. And of course I have no logical explanation for this. One night after my fiancé had moved in, our daughter was at her dad's for the weekend, and my mum was over for dinner and we did a séance. My mum and I have conducted and practiced in many séances over the years, so we're not just kids messing about, and I can't stress this enough. We were slow to start, the energy was low, but we soon had something come through, but it was sluggish and easily confused. It was finally able to tell us that it was not alone and that something was stopping it from communicating with us. Whatever was stopping it came through stronger and started asking us to lend it our souls. Nope. After a while, without much contact, we closed the séance and saged the crap out of the flat just to be safe. And at first it seemed to have worked, until a few weeks ago when lockdown started. Our little girl frequently gets in bed with us. She's 3, and we co-slept until we moved in here when she was nearly 2. We have times where she spends most of the night in her bed, but since lockdown began, she wakes up at least 2 to 3 times a night, gets in bed with us, as her room is right next door, and there's a light from the bathroom so that it's not too dark, and she's never had a problem walking from her room to ours, often without us even realizing she's got into bed with us. The bedroom doors do not slam, the carpet is too thick at the bottom, and they're fire doors with a chain that causes them to close slowly. We've tried to slam the door to our bedroom. It doesn't slam. This is important. Another important tidbit. My fiancée sleeps like they're dead. She never wakes up to our daughter at night. But a couple of weeks into the lockdown, my fiancé woke up to our daughter crying, and what sounded like a little person's footsteps on the laminate flooring in the hall, but wasn't fully awake until our bedroom door slammed. She got out of bed to see where she had gone, and she was in the room, as far away from the bedroom door as she could possibly be. When Little saw my fiancé, she shouted that she wanted Mummy, and ran straight past her and straight to our room, into bed with me. She's had no history of sleepwalking. The next morning we spoke about what had happened. I had very uncharacteristically slept through the whole thing, up to Little getting into bed with me. This is important to note, as I always wake up every night, and I wasn't especially tired. There's no reason for me not to have woken up like normal, and yet I slept through it. We came to the conclusion that firstly, the door should not have slammed, particularly if my little one had pushed it slightly open to get into bed with us. Secondly, why did she run out of the room instead of just getting into bed with us as usual? And thirdly, why was she cowering in the corner of her bedroom? Another important tidbit, our daughter and my fiancé have a wonderful relationship and has zero reason to fear either of us. She's never reprimanded for getting into bed with us or waking up with us. Now this is creepy, but it gets spookier. Later that day, we were all sitting in the living room, and our daughter's phone, used for Paw Patrol and kids puzzles, that was on the fireplace, fell rather violently without rhyme or reason. We were all sitting down. Daughter wasn't jumping about. Our neighbors weren't banging on the walls, and there was no reason for her phone to have fallen. There have been times where the living room, which stays open when pushed all the way, has randomly slammed with no breeze or anything that might have caused it to close. And then our little one woke up. I went in to soothe her back to sleep. She had kicked her covers off, so I pulled them back over her. Then she woke up again talking about a monster under the bed, and asking me if she was safe in her bed. She had a mid-sleeper, so there's space under her bed, but she'd never worried about monsters being under there before. I wanted to share our story and maybe gain some outside perspective on it, and I'll keep anyone updated on what else happens. But I cleansed the flat today, and I'm really hoping it does the trick. This actually happened at my friend Mackenzie's house, which she had only lived in for about a year or two at the point of the event. I don't know when, but I came over to her house to use the Ouija board before anything crazy really happened. We set up candles, switched off the lights. I even read somewhere online that you can use a silver coin to keep a spirit from sneaking through, so I put one on the board. Literally nothing happened, and we got bored. So we went into the garage to listen to Edgar Allan Poe poetry because it was far scarier. And although nothing happened, I felt like I'd mention us doing this, so you can all scold me in the comments for being stupid and using a Ouija. Just don't get your hopes up, because we continue to do dumb stuff throughout the whole experience, and I thought I'd mention it because this is when we got the name for the ghost. Mackenzie's sister, who is also named Mackenzie, said something about talking to Tabuta, the first woman accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. Me and my friend are dumb and had no clue who Tabuta was, so when weird stuff started happening, we just started calling it Tabuta. If the spirit of the real Tabuta is hearing this now, I'm sorry. Now, for the actual experience. This happened on Friday the 5th, 2016. Mackenzie and I were hanging out and decided we wanted to take some Polaroid pictures in the backyard. The sun was setting to the point where it was dim out, but we could still see everything. Mackenzie was standing at the top of the stairs to the dock, while I stood on the lower part and posed for the picture. Looking away from her, as I was standing, I heard her start running down the stairs saying, "I don't know what that is," over and over. If I'm being completely honest, I thought she saw a bug, which scared the hell out of me because I'm terrified of insects. We both ran out, over to the very end of the dock, and I asked her what she saw. She said she was about to take a picture of me, and she heard rustling behind her in the bushes. And when she turned, she saw a tall, almost blacked out figure creeping out from the bushes. After hearing that, I was afraid it was a home intruder or something, and we were both too scared to walk back. Which leads to stupid thing number 2. Because we were so freaked out, we waited too long and the sun eventually set all the way. I had a terrible Android phone, so I had to download a flashlight app, and we ran back into her house in practically pitch darkness. Before we started running, Mackenzie snapped a photo on her camera. There's nothing on it, the blur is her finger, but I might still add it. I had to go home that night, but I made sure to come back the next day. When it was the next day, I came back as soon as I could to investigate. I took many videos, but unfortunately couldn't catch any of the craziest stuff on camera. Mackenzie's cousin was in the house with us, and we all went back out to the top deck to check out the scene. While we were out there, Mackenzie's cousin's phone died at about 30% and would not switch back on. We didn't really think about it too hard, but when we went back inside, Mackenzie's phone began to glitch as well. Every time she typed her password, it would reject it, and I can vouch for her. because I knew her password at the time. Her Siri started going off and saying random stuff, and eventually her phone straight up died as well. Mackenzie's computer was on, and if you've never used Google Hangouts, when you type in the chat you can see when someone else is online and when they're typing. And in the chat it clearly showed that Mackenzie's cousin was online and typing, despite her dead phone being the only electronic she could use Hangouts on. After a while of nothing happening, we were watching all the videos I had taken on my iPad, and were joking about the ghost. Dumb thing number 3. We all started antagonizing it and making fun of it, calling it all kinds of names. And man, I can't make this stuff up. Mackenzie's dead phone from across the room, in her Siri voice, said, now, like it was scolding us. Before you say anything, I know the phrase is just programmed into the Siri, but none of us had touched the phone in at least a half hour, and it was completely dead from what we could tell. Needless to say, we all practically crapped ourselves and ran out of there screaming. Now this is where it gets even weirder. Because we were so freaked out by what happened in the room, we decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to calm down. Since my sister was the oldest in our friend group, Mackenzie wanted to call her because of what happened. When my sister answered the phone, she specifically said the words, "I'm sorry to call you, I'm just too scared to be in my house right now." Literally a week earlier, my sister had a dream in which Mackenzie called her on the phone and said the exact phrase verbatim. In the dream, a group of people had killed and eaten her pet cat, Kahuna, who unfortunately was killed by dogs shortly after this. That wasn't the last time my sister predicted cats dying in her dreams, but that is a whole other subject to tackle on another day. After we told her what occurred in the dream, Mackenzie freaked out, and we ran back to the house and to call the animals out so nothing bad could happen to them. Her mum arrived home as we were all huddling out in the front yard with their cat and pit bull, and she yelled at us. After that, nothing happened for the rest of the day, but odd things would still occasionally happen at her house. I've heard footsteps in her attic, and they actually had a pest control person check up there because of the noise, but there was no proof that anything was living there. I wasn't here for this, but one night Mackenzie was watching Rick and Morty in her room, and her laundry basket just slid across the floor right in front of her. Thankfully, the activity has pretty much dissipated, and nothing that odd has happened in a while, other than the spider bed, but then again, that's another story. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. I'm not going to lie to you, I've been feeling really tired today, and whilst recording the stories, not very late mind you, like in the middle of the day, I just got this wave of tiredness halfway through recording, so I tried to edit those bits out. I did the best I could. I hope they were still enjoyable. If of course you did enjoy it, you can subscribe, as only 73% of you aren't subscribed, so that'd be nice. And yeah, a huge thanks to my wonderful members and patrons whose names can be seen on the screen. If that's you, hey, thanks, you're amazing. And if you'd like your name on here, you can find out how in the description. But for now, I think it's time for me to sign off. Maybe catch an early nap. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.